Colonel Whitmore's hired gunmen received their orders before the March sun had fully climbed over the Arizona desert. "Bring my daughter back," the colonel said. "Alive or dead, I do not care. No matter what condition she arrives in, Rachel will marry Gerald Baxter. If you have to drag her to the altar by her hair, then drag her." Rachel Whitmore ran barefoot along the dusty wagon road, her white dress torn around her legs, her face wet with tears and blood from the cut on her forehead. Her lungs burned as if they were about to burst. Behind her, she could hear horses gaining ground. She could feel the earth trembling beneath her wounded feet. She could see the dust thrown up by the hooves rolling toward her like a cloud of death across that merciless stretch of the Wild West. Then her legs finally failed. She dropped to her knees in the middle of the empty road, certain everything was over. At that very moment, a black horse appeared from beyond a ridge of red stone, as if it had been shaped out of the blazing sunlight itself. The rider's face was hidden beneath the shadow of a battered cowboy hat. He did not give his name. He did not ask who she was. He only reached down with a calloused hand and spoke 3 words that changed everything. "Get on the horse." Before we continue, write in the comments where you are watching from. Rachel had turned 22 that same week. 22 years spent as a prisoner on a lonely ranch in the Arizona Territory, where the law was nothing but an empty word and her father's voice was the only authority that mattered. Colonel Eugene Whitmore owned land that stretched all the way to Horizon Ridge. Every soul in the county feared him. He was a patriarch whose power no one dared challenge in that savage corner of the West. Rachel had been raised on that ranch to embroider, to cook, and to lower her eyes whenever a man spoke. She had been taught to swallow her opinions and dreams as if they were poison. Her mother had died when Rachel was only 12, taken by a fever no doctor in that remote country could cure. With her mother died the last hope Rachel had of ever having someone on her side. Until that cursed week, the colonel had never struck his daughter. He had never needed fists to keep absolute control. The fear Rachel felt for him had been built from harder stone than bruises. It had been made out of long silences, looks that pierced the soul like bullets, and quiet words carrying more threat than any shout. One frown from Colonel Whitmore was enough to turn Rachel into a statue of obedience. That was how she had lived for years, a ghost in her own home. The death sentence for her freedom came on a Wednesday afternoon, when the colonel summoned her into his office. "You will be married in 3 days," he announced without lifting his eyes from his papers. "The groom is Gerald Baxter, a respected rancher. This union will join our families." Rachel felt the blood freeze in her veins when she heard that name, the same name whispered with terror in every saloon from Red Mesa to Dry Creek. Gerald Baxter was known across 5 counties, but not for virtue. He was known for the cruelty he showed his workers, for the whiskey that turned him into a monster, and above all for the dark rumors surrounding the death of his first wife. People said Clara Baxter had died after falling from a horse nearly 3 years earlier. But the men who once worked on Baxter's ranch told a different story when they were certain no one was listening. They said Clara had not fallen. They said she had tried to run. They said the marks on her body could never have come from a simple fall. "Father, I beg you, do not force me into this marriage," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "Gerald Baxter is almost as old as you, and people say terrible things about how his wife died." Colonel Whitmore finally raised his eyes. What Rachel saw in that stare forced her 2 steps backward. "You do not need to want anything, Rachel," he said in a low, controlled voice. "You only need to appear in the church and say yes. Baxter is buying our land in the North Valley, and through this marriage we will become partners." Tears burned Rachel's eyes. "A profitable bargain," she whispered. "And what am I in this bargain, Father? Am I only merchandise?" The slap came so fast she had no chance to defend herself. "As my daughter, you will do exactly what I command," the colonel said. "Now go to your room and prepare yourself. And if I hear one more word of complaint, you will learn there are things far worse than marrying a man you did not choose." Rachel ran from the office, pressing her hand against her burning cheek. Tears streamed down her face in silent rivers. That night, locked inside her bedroom, Rachel made the bravest decision of her life. She would run. She did not know where she could go in that vast and dangerous country. She did not know how she would survive the unforgiving desert of the Wild West. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would rather die trying to reach freedom than live as Gerald Baxter's wife. She waited until every sound on the ranch had gone still. She put on the plainest dress she owned, took the few gold coins her mother had hidden away, and climbed out through her bedroom window. Crossing the yard felt like torture for her trembling nerves. Every shadow looked like one of her father's gunmen waiting to seize her. Still, Rachel kept moving until she reached the dirt road that cut through the desert. Then she ran. She ran as she had never run in her life, bare feet striking the dry earth. She ran because she knew that once her absence was discovered, her father would send every one of his hired killers after her. But she had not been fast enough. When the sun rose over the horizon, staining the desert orange and red, Rachel heard the sound she feared most, horses thundering along the road behind her. Dust rose in the distance, and the shouts of her father's men sliced through the morning like a promise of violence. Rachel tried to run faster, but her lungs were already burning and her legs were shaking. It was in that moment of complete despair, when she stumbled over a stone and fell to her knees on the hot desert ground, that fate decided to intervene. A black horse emerged from beyond the rocky ridge, so majestic that Rachel forgot how to breathe. The rider was only a silhouette against the rising sun. For one terrible instant, she thought he was another of her father's men. Then the stranger reached out his hand, and his voice carried through the heated air in only 3 words. "Get on the horse." Rachel did not ask who he was. She grabbed that hand as if it were a lifeline, and the next moment she was sitting behind him on the black horse, racing across the desert like an arrow. They rode for hours that felt like days. They crossed deep canyons, splashed through hidden streams tucked between the rocks, and climbed hills Rachel had never even known existed. She clung to the stranger's belt with all her strength, pressing her face against his back to shield herself from the wind and sun. The sounds of the pursuit grew fainter and fainter until they vanished completely. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, the stranger guided the horse into a hidden valley surrounded by stony mountains. There, tucked among the rocks, stood a small cabin. It was simple, built from logs and desert stone. But to Rachel, exhausted and trembling with relief, it looked like the safest place in the world. The stranger dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Only then, in the golden light of sunset, did Rachel finally see the face of the man who had saved her life. He was younger than she had imagined, about 28, with dark brown eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. A thin scar crossed his left eyebrow. His hands were rough from hard work, and he moved with the caution of a man who had already seen too much of life. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said while tying the horse. "I am a cowboy, or at least I was until a few weeks ago. This cabin belonged to my grandfather." Rachel watched him in silence. "Why did you help me?" she finally asked. "You do not even know me." Adrian looked at her with an expression she could not read. "I know how to recognize a person running to save her own life," he answered. "And I know what it feels like to be alone in the world." I did not need to know anything more. In the days that followed, Rachel discovered that her rescuer was a man of few words, but of deep actions. Adrian gave her the only bedroom in the cabin and slept in the main room. Not once did he try to approach her in any improper way. He shared his food without complaint, even when it was obvious he barely had enough for himself. He taught her how to build a fire, how to find clean water in the mountain streams, and how to tell which desert plants were safe to eat. Slowly, story by story, they began to learn one another's past. Adrian told her he had worked as a cowboy on the Miller Ranch for almost 10 years and had been one of the best riders in the county. But 3 months earlier, the owner's son had accused him of stealing cattle. It was a lie, invented because Adrian had rejected the advances of that young man's wife. With no right to defend himself, he had been cast out, and his reputation had been destroyed. Posters with his face had been nailed up in neighboring towns, and no one wanted to hire a cowboy accused of theft. His grandfather's cabin had become his only refuge. Rachel told her story too. She spoke of her tyrannical father, her suffocating childhood, and the forced marriage to a man who had probably murdered his own wife. When she finished speaking, she cried. Quiet tears slid down her face as years of buried pain finally found a way out. Adrian sat beside her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are braver than you believe," he said softly. "To run from everything you know, to risk your life crossing the desert. That takes a strength most people will never have. Rachel looked at him through her tears and saw something in his eyes that warmed her from within. Sincere admiration, respect, and perhaps something more. That night, for the first time since her escape, she slept without nightmares. Weeks turned into months, and the cabin hidden in the valley became home for two survivors. Adrian began taking small jobs in nearby towns, breaking wild horses while doing everything he could to avoid attention. Rachel learned to care for the little garden they had planted together, discovering a natural gift for growing life even in that dry soil. She also began gathering medicinal herbs during her walks through the hills. Little by little, almost without noticing it, they built a life together. It was a simple life, but it was filled with real peace. Yet Rachel knew that peace was fragile. Some nights, she still woke from nightmares in which her father dragged her back. Her fears were not foolish, because Colonel Whitmore had not given up. He had planted informers in every saloon and settlement, offering gold for any piece of news. One scorching August afternoon, the inevitable happened. Adrian had ridden out to work at a neighboring ranch. Rachel was alone when she heard horses approaching. Her heart hammered as she rushed to the window, and what she saw turned her blood to ice. 6 armed men, all wearing her father's mark. They had found her. The men were already dismounting, surrounding the cabin with their hands near their holsters and shouting for her to come out. Then she heard the sound that made her heart leap, a lone horse charging at full speed. Adrian. He burst into the valley like a storm. His horse reared as he took in the situation with eyes sharp as a blade. "Get off my land." Adrian's voice thundered through the valley. "This woman is under my protection." The leader of the gunmen laughed with contempt. "You are only a cowboy, and there are 6 of us with guns. Hand over the girl, and maybe we will leave you breathing." Adrian slowly dismounted. His eyes never left the gunman for even a second. His hand hovered near the holster where his revolver rested. "Then come and take her." What happened in the next few minutes was something Rachel would never forget. Adrian was fast with a revolver, faster than any of those men could have imagined. He disarmed the first gunman with a precise shot that knocked the weapon from his hand. The second tried to draw, but Adrian was already on him, dropping him with a hard punch. The fight became a storm of blows, kicks, and gunshots echoing through the valley. But there were too many of them against one man. Adrian managed to take down 4 of the 6 gunmen, but the remaining 2 surrounded him. A rifle butt smashed into his back, making him stagger. Another man used that moment to knock him to the ground. Rachel saw her rescuer fall. She saw the men preparing to finish him, and something inside her broke. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet hanging on the wall and ran outside with a scream. The first gunman never saw the blow coming. The skillet crashed against his head, and he dropped like a sack of potatoes. The second turned in shock, and that moment of confusion was enough for Adrian. He rose and knocked the last gunman down with a right hook that broke the man's nose. Then there was silence. 6 men lay on the ground, not one of them able to continue the fight. Adrian and Rachel stood in the middle of the chaos, breathless, covered in dust, staring at each other. "You saved me again," Rachel said, trembling. "You almost died protecting me." Adrian limped toward her, favoring the wound in his leg. "I would never let them take you back to that hell." And in that moment, under the burning desert sun, Rachel finally admitted the truth that had been growing in her heart for months. "I love you, Adrian." The words escaped before she could stop them. "I know it is madness, but I love you." Adrian was silent for a moment that felt like forever. Then he crossed the distance between them, took her face in his calloused hands, and kissed her as if the whole world were falling apart. When they pulled away, both of them were crying. "I love you too, Rachel," Adrian said, his voice breaking. "I think I loved you from the first time you looked at me with those green eyes full of fear and hope." Rachel laughed through her tears. "What do we do now? My father will never stop." Adrian looked at the fallen gunman, then toward the horizon. "Then we go somewhere he cannot reach us. I have heard of a place in California, far from all of this, where people can begin again. The road is long and dangerous, but if you are ready, I will ride with you to the edge of the world." The journey lasted almost 2 months. 2 months of brutal roads through burning deserts and icy mountains. Nights under the open sky, beneath the stars of the west. But they were also 2 months of endless conversations as they rode side by side. of laughter echoing through empty canyons, and of hands clasped together while they overcame every obstacle. Rachel discovered that Adrian had a beautiful voice and loved to sing old frontier songs. Adrian discovered that Rachel had a gift for telling stories and turning any hardship into an adventure. They argued a few times, but they always found a way to make peace before sleep. When they finally reached California, they found a green valley surrounded by mountains. It was so different from the dry desert they had left behind that Rachel cried the first time she saw it. It felt as if fate had saved that little piece of the world just for them. With the few coins they had left, they bought a small piece of land beside a crystal-clear river. With their own hands, they began building the home that would truly belong to them. It was hard work, but every board they nailed down and every wall they raised was a victory over the past. 5 years passed from the morning when a cowboy reached out his hand to a runaway girl on a dusty road in Arizona. The little house beside the river grew into a thriving ranch with a rich garden, horses in the corral, cows grazing in green meadows, and the finest collection of medicinal herbs in that part of California. Rachel became known as the healer of the valley, a wise woman people visited from distant towns for her natural remedies. Adrian restored his reputation as the best horse breaker in the county. And there was more, far more. There was love, hardened in the fire of hardship, growing stronger with every day. There were 2 children, a 3-year-old girl with her mother's green eyes and a 1-year-old boy with his father's courage, filling the house with laughter. There were true friends in the community, neighbors who had accepted them without too many questions and had now become like family. There was everything Rachel could never have imagined when she had been a prisoner on her father's ranch. One Sunday afternoon, sitting on the porch of her home, watching her children play while Adrian prepared supper, Rachel thought about how completely her life had changed. She thought of the fear she had felt, of the certainty that she would die in the desert, of the hopelessness that had swallowed her when she fell to her knees on that road beneath the punishing sun. And she thought of that single moment when a black horse appeared beyond a rocky ridge and a stranger reached down to offer salvation. Adrian came to the doorway, smiling. Rachel looked at him, at his dark brown eyes still holding 1,000 stories, at his rough hands that had built this life with her, at the scar across his eyebrow that she now considered the most beautiful thing in the world. "I am coming, my love," she answered gently. "I was only remembering how all of this began." Adrian sat beside her and laced his fingers through hers. "It began because you were brave enough to run," he said softly. "I only offered you a ride." Rachel laughed and rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for every moment, for never giving up on me." Adrian kissed the top of her head. "Thank you," he answered, "for giving me a reason to keep fighting." So they sat there, hand in hand, watching the sun sink behind the mountains of California while their children ran across the yard. 2 survivors who had found each other in the most impossible circumstances of the Wild West had built something together that no bullet could ever destroy. And whenever someone in town asked how they had met, Rachel smiled that mysterious smile that always made people curious. "It is a long story," she would usually say, "but I can tell it in the 3 words that changed my life forever." 3 words a stranger spoke to a desperate girl on a dusty road in Arizona. "Get on the horse."